Hi everyone and welcome to this webinar on frontline friction and how it's slowing down business. I've enlisted some panelists to socialize this latest research that we've put together from Unily and Screencloud, and I'm going to share some of those key findings with you today. But I'm also going to ask some of our panelists about their thoughts and feelings on some of the key findings that we found. Just a quick one about Unily. So Unily is the enterprise employee experience platform. We drive organizational velocity for some of the world's most iconic brands. You see some of them on the screen: CVS Health, American Express, Johnson & Johnson, also joined by Smurfit Westrock here with Amelia in attendance. We are the only employee experience platform provider that is listed leader across Gartner, Forrester, and IDC in their respective reports. So you can find them on the Unily website if you want to do a bit of internet research. So I am joined by three panelists today. I'm your host, Kaz Hassan. I look after community and market insights. So I've been driving some of the research that we're going through today. Also look at some of our other thought leadership events like our webinars, and you can see a whole host of more research on the Unily website. But I'm going to start with Sean, if you wouldn't mind, give us a brief introduction to yourself and the work you're doing at Gallagher as well.
Sure thing. Thanks, Kaz. I'm a strategy partner for employee experience and insights at Gallagher's communication consulting practice, always a mouthful, but as well as working with clients, many of whom do have frontline workforces. So I'm very excited to be joining today. I lead on state of the sector. So Gallagher's annual report on the employee communication space, on which we partner with Unily. So I'm really excited to see more data, because I'm a bit of a data nerd, coming through from Unily and Screencloud with this research. That really shines a spotlight on kind of the employee sort of frontline view, whereas what we look at in Gallagher State of the Sector is really the communicator's view. So great compliment there. I'm looking forward to chatting today. Thanks, guys.
Nice. Yeah, the Gallagher State of the Sector is like my Bible of internal comms measurement, and kind of inspires me to think about like what research we do, which has kind of brought us here today. I would next like to hand over to Shabri from Screencloud, our partners with the research as well. Hi, Shabri.
Hi, Kaz. Thanks for having me. I'm Shabri Lakhani. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer here at Screencloud. We're a cloud-based digital signage platform, and we work with over 10,000 customers globally to help transform customer, student, and employee-facing screens into powerful communication channels. The majority of our customers use Screencloud to communicate with frontline workers who, as we know, are often disconnected from traditional corporate communications. We're a strategic partner with Unily, so thanks for having me, Kaz, and excited to talk through the insights.
Super glad you're here. I was at the Screencloud conference last week and returned the favor now, so great to have you. And I'm also joined by Amelia, who I met a couple of years ago at an in-person Unily event in Dublin, and now got you on my webinar. Hi, Amelia.
Hello. Thank you very much, Kaz. So it's lovely to be here. Yeah, my name is Amelia Hennigan, and I'm here representing Smurfit Westrock. So Smurfit Westrock are a global leader in paper packaging, and we have over 100,000 employees in over 40 countries. And my role is I am an internal communications specialist at the headquarters based in Dublin. So a lot of my role is all about connecting with office and frontline workers. And over half of our workforce are frontline workers. So this is a brilliant webinar to be at. And I'm delighted to be engaged and to share my findings and my experience so far. So thank you very much, Kaz.
Nice, thank you so much, Amelia. I'm really glad I've got these panelists, because we've got like a diverse set of experiences and different lenses that we can apply, from like those research lenses, from a digital perspective, but also from one of our customers and in-house specialists. So thank you, Amelia. So my panelists will be back in like 10 minutes, and I just want to give to you a little bit of highlight of the research. I know many registered looking to get this research to start building business cases, but I wanted to give you a bit of context around why we wanted to do this research, because we really wanted to focus on frontline, and I know there's a lot of frontline research out there, so we invested in looking at that frontline. But we identify a massive gap in the frontline research, and specifically that was on the cost of frontline friction, looking at how poor internal communication or digital channels for frontline. I think we know some of the negative impact of that, but what's the actual cost to our enterprises of that frontline friction? And so we were super focused on trying to put a cost behind that can support in-house internal comms and employee experience professionals to understand and communicate that to business leaders. This research is a nicely designed report, and it looks great, and you'll be sent that full report with all of the research, which is from Unity and Screencloud. You'll be sent that tomorrow. I've been told specifically at 2:14 p.m. in the UK time. I'm currently in Atlanta, and so you expect it at 9:14 to be specific. But please let us know what you think about that research. If any of you are on LinkedIn, highlight any of your key findings. Feel free to share the love as well. But you'll be the first ones to see it in your inbox following this webinar tomorrow. So I wanted to pull out what I thought was the headline stat, and I spoke about the importance of a dollar value and understanding the cost of frontline friction. And that cost is this, 80.6 billion. So this is specifically looking at the money lost to American enterprises on poor information access for frontline employees. And we did a lot of work internally. We crunched the numbers to work out and get to this number. But I wanted to be super clear over what is driving that headline figure, because it's a scary figure. But I want to understand a bit of the maths underneath this. I'm keen to know from you guys as well. Feel free to use the chat function and let me know any thoughts, feelings that you have around this research. Does it resonate with you? Do you feel like it might be higher? This is what makes up that top level figure. So what we see here in the top column here are 3 different things that are contributing to that. The first thing is around poor access to information, being unable to work because they are unable to access the right information to do their job. Secondly, it's related to search. Now, we're kind of in a search first culture now, with people expecting different types of search experiences to get that information. This is really, how long does a frontline employee spend searching for information? And thirdly, what's contributing is the redoing of work. And this is something that I didn't necessarily consider, but is the time a frontline worker spends actually redoing work because they didn't have the right information up front. So when you combine those 3 things, we're looking at over 30 minutes for each of them, looking at the average cost of a frontline, the average wage of a frontline worker, and that time, that takes us to that 80 billion stat. I'm hoping this is super useful for you as well, because if you want to see how that applies to your workforce, then you can look at these specific parts of your workforce and see, what is the thing that's driving the friction for your frontline workforces. Now, there are 3 other big key themes, and these key themes I'm also going to pose to our panelists, and I've got some questions around these key themes. The first one is really around communication. And the thing that really shocked me was quite literally, how long does it take for important company information to get from being created to the front line? And we found that it's almost taking a week. And to be specific on that as well, so it's taking a week to reach the front line, but there's a bigger problem once it then reaches the front line, in that there are sometimes crossed wires and mixed messages. Over a quarter of frontline employees said that they had conflicting information from their team or site managers versus headquarters. And so this is another thing that's kind of like disrupting and creating that frontline friction. The second thing is around shadow IT. So this is looking at the maybe misuse of digital tools outside of those sanctioned tools that you're supposed to be using as an organization. And the stat here is around how many workers admit to using unsanctioned tools for sensitive company data. And so that's 37%. So it obviously presents a challenge around making sure that people are using the right tools for the right information. And the third segment here is around the digital workplace, specifically kind of sometimes there's a perception that frontlines aren't digitalized, or that maybe they don't care as much about digital tools. But actually what we found in our research was that 31% would consider moving to a whole new company for a more modern digital workplace. And this is something as well that we see is increasingly important. People are expecting high quality digital tools, and increasingly the way that work gets done is digital. So those are our 3 top level areas, but I wanted to do something a bit new and different. I wanted to do like a little pop quiz. One of the interesting things we did with this research is to ensure that we were asking a diverse set of verticals or industries. And we tried to extrapolate and understand, were there certain trends where industries were performing not as well, or that have higher levels of friction in certain areas compared to other industries? So get your chat window up, and I want to hear from you what you think about some of these key questions. So quick fire, so we'll be super quick on this. But question one, I wanted to get an insight from you on what industry you think it takes for frontline workers to the longest to receive important updates. Do you think it's your industry? Are you in manufacturing or telecommunications or aviation or energy? Let me know whether you think it's your industry, or do you think there's or as a customer, do you interact with these industries, and let me know what you think. Okay, so I'm hearing healthcare. That kind of makes sense, and that's also super important that healthcare information reaches the front line super quick. Lots of different thoughts and feelings coming in, a variety as well, which goes to show me that that there may be a few different offenders when it comes to taking long for important updates to reach the front line. So I will let you know. Oh, hi Liz, by the way. So manufacturing, and the top industry is telecoms. So on average, it takes nearly 7.5 days for frontline workers to receive important company information. But there are many other sectors, some of that you listed: manufacturing, super high; healthcare, super high. When you get the report, you'll be able to compare and contrast your industry and see how you're doing as an industry as well. My second or third quickfire questions is about retention. Specifically, in what industry are frontline workers most likely to leave their jobs in the next 12 months? So let me know again in the chat. Do you think it's your industry? I saw these results and I was like, that's interesting. And I think it kind of talks to the digital point as well. So that's a bit of a clue. Telecoms, logistics, retail, contact centers. Nice. Again, a variety of retail and hospitality. That is very close. Two people saying that. Hi Gary, retail and hospitality. That's very close. So aviation, retail was super high as well. Aviation, we're seeing that 28% of our frontline workers that we surveyed said they're actively looking to move company in the next 12 months. Again, this is something that you're able to attach a dollar value to. So if you're a company or an organization that is super hyper focused on increasing employee tenure and retention, this is something that you'll be able to digest. And lastly, I want to hear which industries frontline workers rely most on word of mouth for information. Now, this can be a problem for enterprise organizations, especially if you're trying to ensure consistency of message across the organization. So you don't want things going over word of mouth. Let me know what you think. Also, you want to ensure that the measurement is a big aspect. Do we know that people have did that message get there, and did they understand that message? And word of mouth often reduces the consistency with that communication, but also is an issue with measurement. So I think a couple of you got this right in the chat. The highest is manufacturing. So word of mouth, super important in manufacturing, on-site team managers, but often we see some of those drawbacks. But actually what you'll notice here is that the percentage is quite close between a lot of those key verticals. So something that is a challenge for almost all frontline first industries. So that's got us warmed up. I done a lot of talking, looked at some of that key research. I now want to pose some of that research and talk and socialize it with some of our panelists. So I'll invite our panelists back on, and I want to start by looking at some of the economic impact. Specifically, there was that big figure around 80 billion, 80.4 billion to be specific. And I want to know, inside of that, there was this big stat around strategy. Specifically, 3/4 of frontline workers don't have a strong grasp of company strategy. Out of all of the stats in the report, this was the one that I was most shocked by, especially kind of recently. It feels like there's been a lot of effort on mission, vision, and values and communicating that. So hearing that 3/4 of frontline workers don't have a strong grasp of company strategy was quite shocking. Sean, I want to come to you first. What do you think is causing that disconnect between the frontline and the company strategy, and what do you think the impact of that is?
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating one, because I know from our own research that the purpose of communications is first and foremost to create strategic alignment, and that's a top priority for communicators as well. So when you hear that the message is not getting through to 3/4 of frontline workers, that's a huge risk and a huge burden. And I think that when we talk about the impacts that can have, I mean, there's a few, right? So if you aren't connected to what's going on in the wider company, particularly on the front line, if you're sort of disconnected digitally, you can feel like a bit of a cog in a machine, which can cause sort of disengagement. And then you get to those turnover costs. We saw those figures around how many people would, be looking to leave in the next year or so. Inconsistencies in the customer experience. So if you're particularly retail or healthcare, if you're delivering one way and then the message coming through is to deliver a different way, the customer on the other end, it's going to affect loyalty or NPS score. And also like compliance and safety is a huge deal for these frontline populations as well. So, if you're not compliant and you're not aware of particular risks, there's financial penalties for the company, reputational damage, let alone like the actual physical like danger risk of health and safety. So I think lower sales, higher churn, increased costs and missed opportunities really. So the huge economic impact, and so fascinating, Kaz, to see that big figure on the screen at the beginning as well, 80.6 billion. Huge.
Yes, yeah, we were geeking out before this, looking at like the maths and inner workings underneath that, kind of research people that we are. And I think there's one thing is that dollar figure, and that's what leaders are really interested in, but also there's a lot of the other stuff that as communicators are interested in, especially when it comes to like consistency of experience, the alignment piece, customer experience as well. Amelia, I want to come to you next. You mentioned Smurfit Westrock, 100,000 employees. I think a large segment of that are quite frontline, aren't they? How do you think about the business impact of like effective or ineffective frontline communication? Is that something that's top of mind for you?
Totally, yeah. And even what Sharon was saying there, I can totally recognize within our business as well. So over half of our workforce are frontline workers, and we do really recognize that impact here at Smurfit Westrock. And you'll always hear our leadership say, people first, and they're the cornerstone of our organization, right? Super important. And to have that focus and not being able to communicate correctly with frontline workers is huge. And actually in about 2021 or so, we did an employee survey, right? So we try to do an employee survey every year. However, COVID, and then we had a big combination last year. So the last one was actually in 2021. And we asked frontline workers in this survey, a lot about, culture, communications, health and safety, etc. And what we got back from that survey was exactly what we're talking about now, that they didn't feel aligned, they didn't feel informed or engaged. And there was actually a part on the survey where, they could just fill in specific feedback themselves. It wasn't something that we were pushing them to say. And this is what they said. They said, we're not as informed or as involved as office workers are. And we found this super, interesting and important. And actually from that is why we decided to choose the Unily platform and choose mobile first, so we could encourage frontline workers and engage them a bit more. So this was a super important, business critical aspect for us.
Nice. I think one of the things you mentioned, like frontline and mobile first, I think that's the right way to start thinking about it. And that when I first met you, that was one of the first things you said to me. And like sometimes being someone that's typically based at a desk, and the people that usually design these employee experience are based at a desk. And so the easy thing is maybe to think desk first, but you always have to do the opposite of that and put yourself in the shoes of like, where is the majority of the workforce and how do we have the biggest impact?
Totally.
How do you, I guess a big part of that was like frontline first and doing that thing so you could connect the frontline workforce and you could communicate to them. I guess that's one big check mark, but probably the next thing you're thinking about is how do you keep that up? Like, how does that engagement up? Is that something you thought about?
Yeah, of course. So I guess a step back from that first, right? From a HQ perspective and sending out communications, prior to having Unily, we could communicate with our frontline workers via posters, table tent cards or pull-up banners around the place, which are all physical, notice boards, and then digital signage. So we do have digital signage and we have been pushing this out. These are all great means. And of course, digital signage is, bringing in that technical aspect and that more digital side of things, but it's all one-way communication, right? So people, they're just looking at it and then they're walking by. And it's very difficult to get them and keep them engaged in this information. And funnily enough, sometimes maybe if you do give them the information, because they're not that interested, they just won't read it. So having Unily kind of led us to have a more, engaged two-way communications with our frontline workers, which was key. And it's something that we're currently, we're still in the process of doing. We're still rolling it out to all of our sites, and it's taking quite a while because it's, we're taking our time and we're doing it right. And what I would say I've learned so far is that we're onboarding kind of country by country. So we've done France, we're doing Germany at the moment, and we have approximately 30 sites, in each of those countries. And then in each of those sites, you could have, 100, 200 employees, right? So having the app and working with the people at site, I've, seen such different opinions and actually what they want at site level, right? And what keeps their employees engaged. And I would say, business critical communications is, of course, important. As you were just saying, Sharon and Kaz at the beginning, they want to have the strategy. They want to understand, the company values, and having a platform where they can go and they know where that information is, rather than maybe just seeing it on the digital signage once every month or on a piece of, a poster when there's a campaign going on. Now they have one place to go to find that information. Apart from that, I'd say language is a huge one. So any communications that we do at Group, we translate into 26 different languages. So no matter what campaign we do, health and safety, pride, other DEIB initiatives, cybersecurity, whether it's going on email, on digital signage, on the platform, we always get it translated. And of course, this removes the barriers of people, especially frontline workers that may not understand English, because it's not necessary for their job to speak in English. So we shouldn't expect that they should receive communications from us in English. So language is a huge one. Some other interesting ones I would say are, we came across one of our sites doing monthly videos with their CEO, right? And their CEO just took the phone and gave updates. And what they said at site level is that people don't want this highly filtered, perfectly shot video, right? They just want to see unfiltered content, human to human, and actually know what's going on. So this was another really nice one as well. So there's a lot of different initiatives and stuff that we've learned as well from sites.
I'm a big fan of unfiltered video myself, so that's good. And I also think it speaks to the sometimes the over focus on the quality actually makes it not relatable, and I think that's a great point.
And they just look at it and say, "Here's something else from HQ. Is it going to be talking about this or that?" So yeah.
You mentioned a few different channels there. I want to think about the signage part of that. Shabri, I want to come to you. I was really impressed by the diversity of signage and how actually maybe looking at digital signage through a different lens can actually have a direct correlation to business impacts. The report is really about frontline friction. So how have you thought about, or how can signage reduce that frontline friction and really be anchored into some of those big business outcomes that leaders are interested in?
So I think what really stood out to me in the research report was the 31-minute daily productivity drain, about how people were struggling to find information. And I think when I saw that, I thought about how digital signage can actually help directly address that. So I think about that in three different ways. I think the first is information availability. So as we know, the majority of the frontline workers lack access to company emails and intranet. So traditionally have relied on really manual workarounds like notice boards and printed information, which actually just creates a really poor employee experience. So what digital signage allows companies to do is meet workers where they are physically. And it's what Domino's call a drive-by experience. So, as you were saying, Amelia, it doesn't require any search time. You can just, you can walk past it and see it, and you're actually pushing that information to where they are. I think the second piece is information reliability. So there was a stat in the research report that said 35% of frontline workers distrust information they find. That's huge. And so I think what you get with digital signage is you can power screens with automated feeds, so it can be coming from existing apps, whether that's Microsoft Teams or dashboards and Power BI. But so it means that content is always current. And then lastly, it's information relevance. And what I mean by this is the fact that we're able to enable companies to have centralized control with local flexibility. So you can have an HQ that wants to have corporate messaging, as an example, messages from leadership or other particular corporate initiatives that are going on. But then as you have specific distribution centers or factories, local managers are then able to add site-specific content, whether that's around productivity and engagement or whether that's around employee engagement and wishing people happy birthday. So when we think about that from a business outcome perspective, if you can do this well, the business impact it has can be varied from significant cost savings on printed communications to higher participation rates in critical programs like benefit enrollment and things like that, to improve safety and compliance. So then when you look back at that 31-minute daily productivity drain, that's 124 hours per employee annually. And if you're a large enterprise with a significant frontline workforce, that's millions of hours recaptured back in productivity time per year.
That's it kind of is crazy. Also, I think it's interesting to like looking at the technology through a different lens and thinking like more diverse types of communication as well. Like we mentioned safety communication, but also it's like understanding the mix of that, and part of that is measuring like how much you're communicating on different areas. Is it that right mix, and is it the right mix at the right time?
Yeah. If I may add something there to what Shabri was saying about the 31-minute daily productivity loss and searching for information. So when we were onboarding our German sites onto the app Unily, one of the we had a call with the general managers of all the sites to ensure that they understood and were on board with the platform. And one of them asked the question to me. He said, Amelia, right now I have like 5 different platforms where I can send information. I use Facebook, LinkedIn, WhatsApp, and a SharePoint site, which is an internal tool, the only one of which he mentioned. And he said, why should I adapt? Why should I use Unily when I have all these tools already? And just in him asking that question, it shows that he had maybe 4 platforms, different platforms for different reasons of communications that were all external, right? And then maybe one platform internally. And, what I said to him was, you're creating one place for the source of information, and it's an internal tool, and people will trust this tool as well. So this comes back exactly to what you're discussing. People don't know where to go or where to look, and you're using all these different channels, and there's no specific strategy.
That trust point is really important, because one, you're not just trying to check a box of communication, you're trying to ensure that the right communication gets there, and that's understood and has the impact the right way. That's a great point. I think the other specifically around like communicating, that there was a stat that I shared earlier around 4.5 days. That's the time it takes for that like important information to get to the front line. Higher, like significantly higher in telecoms as well, ironically. And Sean, actually, I wanted to ask you a little bit about that. We've got that headline stat, but you work with a few different customers through Gallagher. How are you seeing the organizations that are maybe the highest performing and thinking about it differently? What are the sorts of things they're doing to maybe try and reduce that?
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting as well. Like, it's such a benchmark to have that 4.5 days. And I think I was sort of delving and nerding out on the data like we'd like to do. That, I think that estimate is based on sort of when the comms goes out to when Frontline sees it. So you can assume that sort of time, that hold up there, is either the time to find the info, which we know is taking 30 minutes a day, or that lack of connectivity. So the shift patterns and shared devices and things like that. It really does sort of make that case for that one all-encompassing, like one point of truth. And I think, as Amelia's alluded to, it's like having that single source is kind of, in my mind, best practice when it comes to Frontline. And I know when you're in office space, you're working with different apps and platforms and programs and things like that. But particularly for the Frontline, just having a really reliable source of truth. And I think too that the point around trust has come up, and I think the stat was like 35% said they can't trust the accuracy of the information that they do find. And I think while we know Frontline, when it comes to Frontline employees, managers are key critical to that, but there's no reason that this single source of truth isn't for managers as well. And I think the mistrust is bred when your manager says one thing and then headquarters says another. And actually, if you have that single source of truth and the two are aligned and you're not getting mixed messages, and it becomes, an increase of trust there. So, I think in terms of best practices, obviously not all frontline populations are the same, doing the same kind of task, but I just think really considering that drag on time, that 4.5 days, what goes on in a week, or if you're in a factory and, being quite naive about it, but like how many widgets are created in a week and like the productivity that brings. And I think that huge drag on people being able to pivot or change what they're doing or react to new strategy or new information, in our personal lives, imagine if you waited a week to find out that there was an interest rate change or like the gym was closed. Like imagine waiting a week to find that out, and you sort of imagine that sort of knock-on effect, how that would affect your day or your week. The same goes for frontline and populations there. So single source of truth, I guess, would be my best recommendation from working with clients.
And when you put that 4.5 days in the context of like what feels like a week today, like companies are pivoting their whole strategy overnight, depending on things like tariffs and geopolitical issues. And there's so much changing that like 4.5 days, by the time that message gets to the front line, it may be an incorrect message. Yeah. I wanted to talk a little bit about actually there's a question around two-way communication. Amelia, you kind of brought this up a bit earlier. I'm seeing it in the chat. By the way, if anyone does want to ask a question, we do have a formal Q&A segment at the end, so I'll try and get to the highest voted ones. But I'm stealing one of them early. So one of them's specifically around
Is Kaz frozen?
Oh, maybe.
Oh, he's back.
Okay.
We're back.
Nice. So there was a stat from the research about that only basically a quarter of workers feel their feedback reaches the leadership. How do you think about that? You mentioned two-way at Smurfit Westrock. How do you think about that kind of like feedback and research to make sure that like those dots are connected?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So as I mentioned already, we do try and conduct a yearly employee survey. And one thing I would say about this is that we try and make it super accessible for our frontline workers, right? Because we can send an email to all the desktop users, we can send a reminder email to them, they'll get it straight into their hands. However, it's different for frontline workers, right? Again, there's a lot more barriers in place there to actually get that two-way communication from them. So what we do for our employee survey is that we actually put iPads at all of our sites, and we really encourage, of course it's up to them at the end of the day if they want to do it or not, but we really encourage them to sit down and do it, and we give them the time to do it. So this has really improved our participation in surveys and getting that information from the frontline workers. And another aspect of that now is that we have that two-way communication with Unily, right? So before this we had no platform where we could actually get information from them. And now we're finally reaching them individually. So we can put information on the platform. We can put up surveys. We can, put an email address there. Of course, this is their personal device they are using. However, it allows for two-way communications. So we really do encourage, even at site level, for them themselves to put in some two-way communication there so people can actually message and feel a bit more involved. So that's kind of what we're doing. And the more we're moving digital and so on, and the more we're trying to get more information from them.
Nice. I might come both to Sian and Shabri on this. Sian, I'll start with you. You mentioned maybe some like innovative ways that people are thinking about like two-way, specifically the problem around strategy alignment, which was that 72% of frontline workers saying they don't grasp the company strategy. What are some ways that you see maybe to decrease that percentage that are maybe a bit more innovative? And then I'll come to you after, Shabri.
Yeah, going back to what Amelia was saying, like frontline first. And I guess a few, examples that I've heard of working really well, having the frontline, if there is a strategy to be disseminated, then actually having the frontline do that sort of presentation, or have someone from the frontline then saying how they're working on contributing to that new strategy from where they sit, makes it a lot more relatable. So it's like kind of a frontline first briefing, but also thinking about like screens and digital. kind of micro storytelling, right? So taking a big nebulous strategy, which obviously has to fit the desk workers and the frontline workers, it's the whole company, but taking that strategy and breaking it down into micro stories. So thinking about like, what does customer centricity mean to Billy as he's stocking shelves at 6 a.m.? So just taking kind of small moments of a frontline worker's life to kind of say how that fits into that wider the strategy. So if customer centricity is the new way forward, then how are you enacting that at the kind of ground level? And I think too, particularly, we've worked with clients before that have a vast workforce, many with different languages, but also with people who speak languages other than English. So English is their second language in the UK, or maybe there's low literacy levels, but using a lot of visual markers. So using emojis or symbols that are familiar to people in their personal lives. But, if you are clearly demarcating, the pillars of your strategy with particular visuals, repeating them again and again makes it really familiar, and it makes it a lot easier to understand and signpost those strategic markers, I suppose. So visuals, frontline first, and micro storytelling would be my hot tips.
Yeah, and I love that like micro storytelling thing as well. It's like the idea that it talks to the point around from the media said around there, like polished content maybe is like not resonating and subverting that a little bit. Shabri, what about yourself? What are you seeing from a kind of innovation perspective, from your perspective?
Yeah, so I want to share one of my favorite examples, which we did recently for one of our customers in the energy sector, who have a huge frontline workforce, but they wanted to stream their CEO town hall. The CEO was in Monaco, and they wanted to get that town hall to 700 screens globally to a predominantly deskless workforce. And so we were able to do this by leveraging the broadcast app on our platform and streaming the team's town hall that they had. And we added a sidebar with a QR code for mobile engagement, which obviously then the comms team were able to then link back to analytics, as well as a footer. And I think that initiative stood out to me because we were truly enabling a digitally disconnected workforce to be able to engage directly with company leadership for one of the first times. And I think that can have a huge impact on employee engagement and having that sense of belonging. But I think broader than that, the interactive QR code experiences, I think, are really powerful because they enable workers to access resources or submit feedback. And we have a good example where a company in the healthcare sector was able to gather 2,000 frontline suggestions in 6 months. So it turns that communication in from one way to actually giving them a voice. And then lastly, I'll call out Seadrill, who's a mutual customer of Unily and Screencloud. And I think they're doing this really well from a strategy perspective. And I know this is something that you've worked on them as well, Kaz, but they're really prioritizing that frontline workforce with really special video campaigns that are targeted to them. And I think the impact of that is that gives employees a sense of recognition, that sense of belonging, because if you can showcase frontline voices by highlighting their content and their success stories, that makes a huge difference and then addresses that belonging gap, which we know is a problem. So I think the future is building these communication networks where screens become that push-pull communication and also that conversation starter, and then you can start to see engagement across the other channels that you have in place as well.
Yeah, so love that. And I kind of feel also we kind of answering some of these questions as we go around inspiration and examples. I think people are loving it's always great to hear from the case studies. Shabra, I actually want to stick with you on this because you're CRO at Screencloud. Many people in the audience are thinking about communicating, I guess, the value of that to leadership, but also starting to build business cases. How do you think people can build better business cases with this data to ensure that they get the right investment for frontline communication tools?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I know it's something that a lot of companies need help with. When I was going through the research report, the biggest stat that stood out to me that I think could help with this is the one where it mentioned 71% of workers are using unauthorized tools to access information. that figure should be setting off alarm bells for any management team, because I think that figure signals a really critical gap between what organizations provide and then what your frontline workforce need. And to me, that signals a bigger problem than just communications. I think that's about operational risk, efficiency, and competitive advantage in an environment where that frontline execution is everything. So if I were to give some advice, I think the most successful business cases focus on 3 key value drivers. I think the first, which I know we talk to a lot of IT teams about, is security risk costs. So there's a stat that 37% are sharing sensitive data through unofficial channels. And one telecoms client that we had calculated that potential fine at $2 million, right? So right there, you have a tangible number that you're at risk of paying. The second is productivity impact, and this is huge in the frontline, as we know, but frontline workers are losing 376 hours annually due to poor access to information. So if you're a company that has 10,000 employees, that's over $83 million in productivity drain, right, which is huge. And then I think the last piece, which is which is often harder to quantify, but it's definitely possible, is around retention benefits. So the stat that you shared in your summary at the start, Kaz, which is 31% are willing to move to a more digital workplace. That's huge, right? That demonstrates the amount of people that you're at risk of possibly losing. And we work with the Southeast Ambulance Service, and they were able to reduce their frontline turnover by 23% after implementing proper communication tools. So I think if you're looking at a business case, and always arm it with data, but to me, what's really clear is the cost of doing nothing far exceeds the investment in having a fully integrated communication strategy.
Yeah, and I also think sometimes you've outlined those 3 things perfectly, because it's kind of like sometimes in the day-to-day of communication employee experience roles, you can get lost in vanity metrics, but when it comes to getting the right investment, we need to be like anchored into some of those big drivers that are being discussed at the leadership level. Something else that came up here, and I think this is relevant for some industries more than others, something that is top of mind for a lot of leaders at the moment is around customer experience. Sian, when people are thinking about frontline technology and getting investment for that, what sort of things should they be thinking about to ensure that they're the right things that are mapped to things like revenue and customer experience?
Yeah, and I think what you've struck on there is really what's the priority for the organization. So if customer experience is a big deal, how can you connect up having the right technology to drive that? And I think when we look at making a business case, it's definitely about what are those key numbers that leaders are tracking, whether it be customer experience or engagement or productivity or time to market, things like that. If you can hook your communications case onto those numbers, you'll do a great job. And I think when we look at who makes those channel decisions, what came out in our state of the sector research was that it's most commonly internal comms, HR, IT, and C-suite. So if you can get sort of that group of 4 on board to kind of make those channel decisions. And I think just rolling back a minute too, just thinking about that stat around 31% were looking to move to another company with a more digital kind of workplace. That retention factor, which you touched on, Shabri, is like more than half of communicators are responsible in some way for retention. So it's definitely not just an HR thing. Comms and HR are responsible for retention. And what we found was that the communicators that had a higher channel satisfaction were more likely to be hitting their KPIs. So if you draw a line between those few things, if your channels work, you can hit your KPIs, people will stay. So channel satisfaction is good for everyone. And I think what I love about the report as well, Kaz, is just the maths is kind of there. If you were to look at the report and how you've worked out those big figures that you're coming up, that 80.6 billion and the 31 minutes and things like that, you can take those numbers and feed it into your workforce and kind of calculate your own sort of metrics as well to come up with that business case. And I think if you can link it to risk, as you pointed out, Shabri, that risk of like working outside of the approved technology, That's a great way to get leaders' attention as well for the business case too.
Yeah, I've seen Chuck post a comment in the chat around the cost of doing nothing. Sounds familiar. He did a talk looking at kind of haunted by ROI, and actually like these are some of the things. It's like kind of subverting that a little bit and thinking about the big strategic drivers of the role. I actually have a few more questions, but I'm looking at the Q&A segment and there are a whole host of questions there. So I actually might pivot and ask some of the audience questions. I've got loads as well prepared, but I see like the chat and the Q&A panel going quite heavy. So let's ask what's top of mind for us. If you're wondering where that is, that's in that little chat window. You'll see Q&A panel at the top. If you don't have any questions yourself, you can actually upvote other people's, and I'm going to go in the order of the top voted ones to make sure I get to the ones that are top of mind for everyone. But of course, ask your own question as well, or vote on other people's. And I will start with the top voted question from Gabby, which says, I'm curious to know how others are encouraging their frontline workers to download the mobile app. We found that many don't want a company app on their personal device. And I think this has come up. I've definitely had this sort of question come up before. Let's go. I think that Amelia, how are you thinking about this? I know it's a challenge for you guys as well. So there isn't a silver bullet, but I know you've done some work at thinking about overcoming that.
Yeah, no, of course. Yeah, that is, of course, it can be difficult when you're dealing with personal devices, right? And of course, in some countries as well, depending on where you're located, there's works councils and stuff like that. But the approach that we have taken is that it's not something you have to download, right? So we're encouraging you to download it. And we've switched over to Unily as our main source of news and company information on desktop as well as on mobile. So what we did was we kind of said, okay, we're turning towards Unily for everything. And we're hoping that people will get used to the platform, even at site level. Frontline workers, of course, they don't have the desktop, right? However, their managers, their general managers, the plant managers, and so on are getting to, they're getting used to the platform and they're getting used to Unily, and then they see other people using it, right? And then we hope it's word of mouth as well. So what we do is we launch a communications campaign. So we use, as Shabri was saying, digital signage, and we have a QR code there on the digital signage encouraging the people to download the app. We have posters as well. We have pull-up banners and so on. And then we encourage people, depending on where they're located, to do what suits their specific site best, right? Because it's not one size fits all either. So a really good example of what our French sites did is they did an Olympics challenge when the Olympics was on in France, and they hosted a fitness challenge. So it was running, swimming, walking, and cycling, and they hosted this on the Unily app. And what they did is they coincided their launch of the Unily app with the launch of this fitness challenge, and then people got on the app, they got used to the platform, and then by the time the fitness challenge was over, they knew they could go there for other information. So, another example that another site did was, gamification. They incentivized people through, at Easter, they had an Easter egg hunt on the app, and they got people used to the platform. So the first kind of aspect is getting people to download the app. And once they've actually downloaded it and gotten used to it, then they are encouraged to go back because their employees are there. And it's like, oh, did you see what was on the app? We call it MySW. Did you see what was on the MySW app? And then if they haven't downloaded it, they want to because their peers are doing it. So that's kind of the advice and experience that I've had so far.
Nice. I think that's a really good example. I think what I've taken away from that answer is there isn't one thing that needs to be done. Actually, it's a combination of like building like a center of gravity with compelling content that's trusted. It's having the right multi-channel strategy to drive the downloads. It's even maybe thinking about like productivity related elements, like is it aiding their work in some way? Because you're not just wearing communication hat. Often you have to work like cross-functionally to get some of these outcomes and to drive those downloads.
Hopefully, yeah.
I will go to the next question from Emily Reed, hello, which says, can anyone share examples of authentic frontline communications using different channels? I feel like everyone could chime in on this. Does anyone want to take it? I will go with Shabri, maybe.
Yeah, happy to chime in here. I think what we see is like the campaigns that are created need to be like thought of as actually a campaign, right? So you can say as a comms leader, what do I want to target this month? Okay, the goal that I want to target is to drive up benefit enrollment as an example, right? And I think to your point, Amelia, like there is no channel that works really well by itself. Like this is, I think, what we talk about when we talk about like an integrated cross-channel communication strategy. And I think you can have screens that have a QR code that take you to the intranet page, right? You can have the intranet page that's then like followed up with by an email. And I think it's all these things that you like can think about as a campaign. But I think also ask your workforce, right? You can ask and survey your workforce of, you know, in like culture recognition and things like that, of where do you feel like you're missing the gaps, right? We can take some of this data that we've already received. And so I think when we think about frontline communication, that's where I think the headquarters-centered content and then the local content, people don't always want to hear about. If you're a factory in Minnesota, as an example, you don't necessarily want to hear about everything that's going on at HQ in Germany, right? You can't relate to it. So I think it's about finding the balance between what do the employees care about and then what do they need to know from a corporate centralized standpoint.
Yeah, and really good point, Shabri. If I can add on that, in my experience or our experience in Smurfit Westrock, it's really about aligning HQ initiatives with local initiatives. Yeah. And we're a very decentralized organization, right? So we give the power to the local sites and we want them to create the content that is interesting for their employees. So we make sure that we align with them on the communications that we're going to send out and that they want to send out, and that we can have, a good balance of both. And again, this is where Unli is really coming in handy, because we can send out targeted information in their specific language to the relevant people, and they can at the same time create local content that is relevant to them. So it's about finding that balance.
Yeah, I think this kind of something we kind of touched on it a little bit in the webinar, but actually like the increased importance of like localization and like having the right data to target to the right people, because otherwise you create this kind of like the friction comes from like we're in an era of mass noise and communication, and I feel like everyone knows that. So the much more like tight and targeted you can be to get the right message there is super important. And also, I guess, like if anyone is from an internal comms strategy perspective, putting in the right strategy and being clear where the guardrails are, because otherwise it becomes like overload and yes, without the right governance, it will kind of it will go into like everyone will communicate to everyone at every time, which is the opposite of what we want. I actually, this is kind of like completely unrelated, but I'm thinking of examples. I was at an event yesterday in Atlanta, and there was a really great example around, especially when it comes to leadership communications. Sometimes we see inspiration from, like we'll go to a webinar or an event and we'll see a great example of like great video content, or it might be like a podcast, and we're like, yes, we need to do that. But actually, I think sometimes the answer is being agile to like understand like who the leader is and what their style is and what their message is. Because sometimes, and I'm sure no doubt some people have experienced this, you have like a leader that feels like forced to do video, and it doesn't feel like it's their natural way to deliver a message. And so what this communication team realized was that through speaking to this particular leader, that actually he would write notes in his Apple Notes, and he would then like send that to the communication team to then create the video, and then they'd then film the video. And then they just thought, well, why don't we just publish the notes? They're unpolished, sometimes spelling mistakes in there, but it's kind of like what's top of mind for him. And that was kind of like, that actually felt more like was relevant to the culture of the company, more importantly, was like natural to that leader. And it goes to show that like, it's not about shoehorning a type of communication style in. We're not looking for cookie cutter communication. We're looking for like what that message is and who's trying to relay that message. And so I thought that was a good example that someone shared. Fortunately, it wasn't mine, so I'm sharing on behalf of someone else. Let's go to the next question. So this is from Emily as well. So we brought up safety communication. How would you recommend safety briefings are delivered to the front line? Emily says that they've tried electronic briefing systems, but that kind of ends up being a tick box exercise and wasn't necessarily absorbed well. There's a great point there around absorption, specifically because it's not about, okay, they've seen it, but actually, did they understand it and did they action it in the right way? Would anyone like to take this one, Shabri?
Yeah, I'm happy to chime in there, because I think safety is one of the things that lots of our customers with a frontline workforce use screens for. And I think it ties into what we refer to as the communication arc. So A is around screens being really able to quickly grab attention, because getting people's attention is hard. So, you know, I think there is an element there. If I sent you the same email every single day with the same topic, it would seem repetitive and probably slightly aggressive, right? But with that same message coming on screen, you're able to capture people's attention. The R is for retention, and this is where we see screens work really well in creating memorable moments. It taps into memory and you know, you're kind of about building repetition in a more natural way. And then the C in the communication arc is about cognition. And there is something that we just see with visually where that helps cultivate a much deeper understanding. And so when we think about the importance of safety briefings and how it's really important to actually repeat some of those messages, remind people about what they do and don't need to be doing, we do find that screens is a really easy way to do that, as opposed to like a 10-minute live safety briefing in the morning, which is, you know, people are either turning up late or they're not listening or they don't remember. And so we think, you know, if you are able to put something like that out there on a screen, it can really help with attention.
That's a great point. And we're kind of coming up to time now. Oh, sorry, go for it, Emilia.
No, I was quickly just going to say, because we've just done our big health and safety campaign, because it was Health and Safety Day on the 28th of April, I think. So, of course, what Shabri was saying, you know, we worked on a multi-channel communications campaign. And what we do here at Smurfit Westrock is we create, you know, a briefing deck for people, and we translate it into all of our languages, and we give it to all of our general managers across the world for them to give to their specific employees. And along with that, then we align the different types of communication. So digital signage. So we have a video on there. We have statistics, and this is reoccurring every day for 2 weeks. Then we have posters that, you know, match this campaign and reiterate that message. We have table tent cards, and we have pull-up banners, and we encourage people at site level to do all this. So again, you know, we created that group, but it disseminates across all of our sites, which, you know, has worked quite well.
I think they're gonna third all of that as opposed to second it. But I think too, just across everything that you're saying there, it's that cohesive visual look and feel, right? So if everything is consistent across like what the manager's saying, what you see on the screen, what you find with the intranet, all of that needs to kind of like add up to look the same, and then that repetition starts to build that recognition, and then the, you know, the behavior change.
Yeah, I also think to kind of like finish us off, you'll see a pop up, by the way. So if you want to look at the frontline worker experience in the Unily app, we'll also send out a follow-up email with all of the research. And if you want to click through to see some of the signage solutions from Shabri and Screencloud as well, you'll be able to do that through the email. We are coming up to time. Our panelists have been great. The conversations flowed super well. We also have more questions than we have time for, but if we didn't get to answer your questions, we will take a download away, and we will also basically follow up via email. So I will ask some of these questions as a follow up, and then we'll follow up via email. Also, just before you hop off, we love our virtual events, but we also love our in-person events. I love kind of like thought leadership events and bringing people across the industry together. Unite 25 is our employee experience conference. Last year and the year before, it was the biggest employee experience conference in the world. We're in London. This year, we're bringing it stateside. We'll be in Nashville. So we'd love to see you there. You can scan that QR code. And thank you so much for attending. Look forward to that research in your inbox tomorrow. And please share any thoughts, findings, quotes from this webinar, but also the research on LinkedIn. I've seen some messages and questions, but we'll definitely follow up with all of them. Thank you so much for attending, and thank you to my panelists. Goodbye, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.